Hello and welcome to page number 15 of chapter number 10. Communication of details of GSTR1 to the recipient of the supply. The supplier has populated the invoice level details in GSTR1 B2B supplies. Now this information which has been populated by the supplier in GSTR1, it will be communicated to the recipient. It will be communicated to the recipient. It will be auto populated. It will be auto populated in form in part A of form number GSTR 2A in respect of regular dealer, GSTR 4A in respect of composition dealer. Now this will be through common portal. Now when this will be available? After 10th day of the succeeding month. Means when the due date for filing the GSTR1 is 10th of next month. So after 10th of next month they will be available in GSTR2A and GSTR4A of the recipient. How are the details of outward supplies furnished in prior periods amended? Friends, in every law where returns are to be furnished, there will be a provision which enables the rectification or a revision of the return already filed. Of course, they will be enabled only through fulfillment of certain conditions or within a prescribed time period. So GST law has also some kind of arrangement for rectification of mistakes which have crept in while furnishing the returns. Let us say while furnishing the return for the period September 2019, what happened is while entering one invoice, some mistake has crept in. Or it may so happen that an invoice pertaining to September 2019 was not at all recorded. It was missed somehow. Now, is there any mechanism for rectifying these mistakes? So table number 9, table number 10 and table number 11.2 of GSTR1 will give us the facility to amend the details of outward supplies which were furnished in the earlier periods. Okay. Now we famously call it as amendment table. Also, the details of original debit notes, credit notes, refund vouchers issued by the taxpayer in the current tax period. Also, revision of debit notes, credit notes, refund vouchers of the earlier tax periods are to be disclosed in table number 9 of GSTR1. Table number 9 of GSTR1. Now, for the purpose of rectification or amendment to be made in respect of earlier invoices which were issued, what you have to do is in the amendment table, you have to give the original invoice number, because in September 2019, a mistake has crept in. Now, in November 2019, I identified that mistake and I will be able to amend while filing the or in the November 2019 return. So when was that invoice originally issued? In the month of September. So this invoice which was wrong amounts are fed in respect of that invoice, it is in the month of September. Now, at the time of furnishing the November return, what I have to do is I have to go to the amendment table and type in there the number of the original invoice and the date of the original invoice. Then that invoice will be displayed and then I can make the amendments. Now sometimes it may happen that this fellow, as previously discussed, this fellow missed one invoice in September 2019 altogether. Then how to rectify that mistake? Should I now feed that invoice in B2B supplies of November 19, or should I go to the amendment table and fill there? Now it has been provided that even though if the invoice is altogether left out in the earlier tax periods, then the such invoice is to be included in the current month's GSTR1 only in the amendments table. So in such cases also he has to show that invoices in the amendment table. This is very important, you have to keep in mind, as such types of errors will also be regarded as data entry error, and therefore you have to include it in amendments table only. The same is represented in a pictorial manner. Particulars furnished in GSTR1 of period periods can be amended, and amendment table given in GSTR1 of the subsequent periods. Now, rectification of errors. If supplier discovers any errors or omissions, he will rectify the same in the tax period during which such error or omission is noticed, and pay tax and interest in case there is a short payment in the return to be furnished for such tax period. Now what here it has been said is, if an error or omission has been noticed, suppose September 2019 return, this error has been noticed in November 2019. So what he is saying, what here it has been provided, the same is noticed, the same, rectify the same in the tax period during which such error or omission is noticed. So when was the error or omission noticed? It was noticed in November 19. So they have noticed in November 19 that they have committed a mistake in the return of September 19. Now when you have to rectify it, you have to rectify it in the tax period during which that error or omission has been noticed. It has been noticed in November 19. So rectify it in the return of November 19. This we can understand by way of an example. A supplier discovers a mistake in details of invoice furnished in GSTR1 for the month of August in October. So the August 19 return has been furnished within the due date. Now in October, what has happened is, this taxable person noticed that some mistake has been committed in the return of August. Now this August return can't be revised. There is no concept of revision in GST returns. There is only a concept of a rectification or amendment, right? So if he has noticed that mistake done in August return in October, you can make an amendment in October to rectify that mistake. Now, what is the time limit for rectification? Can this rectification be done any time after that return has been furnished? No, there is a time limit within which that rectification can be made. Okay, what is the maximum time limit? The date for filing the monthly return under 39 for the month of September following the end of the financial year, or date of filing the relevant annual return, whichever is earlier. Now let us assume that a mistake has been committed in October 2019 return. So this mistake, by what time it can be rectified? It can be rectified. This is financial year 1920. It can be rectified latest by financial year 2021 September return. September return due date is 20th October 2020, or the date of filing of return annual return for 1920. The due date is 31st December 2020. But if let us assume that this person has furnished it on 16th of August 2020, what is that annual return? Annual return, he furnished it by 16th of August 2020. So whichever is earlier. So whichever is earlier, 16th August is a earlier date. So the mistake that has been committed, or omission that has been committed in October 2019 return, can be rectified by 16th August 2020. It means that once annual return has been furnished for this financial year, then no rectification is possible. Then how to rectify it? If any additional tax is liable to be paid because of that mistake, correction of that mistake, what you have to do is you have to go through DRC 303 route. It is not that since the time limit has expired, the tax need not be paid. It is not like that. You have to pay the tax if additional liability is arising due to that mistake. Then you have to separate that mistake by furnishing the DRC 03. An entity has furnished the annual return for the financial year so and so on August 15th of the succeeding financial year. An error is discovered in respect of transaction pertaining to month November of XY year. Let's substitute 1920 for XY. So November 19 return, a mistake has been committed. Now this fellow, when did he file the annual return? The annual return was furnished YZ year, 15th August. So 15, 8, 20. He furnished the annual return. Right? The entity has filed the returns for the month of September. The entity has filed the return of September 2020 return on October 2020. So 20, 10, 2020, whichever is earlier, 25th August. So within or 15th August. Within 15th August, they have to rectify this. Beyond that, it is not possible. Now, let's understand here, it is not the due date for filing. This is the date of filing that is to be taken into account. This is not the due date for filing the return, but it is date of filing the return, annual return. Okay. Now, some additional points we have to take into consideration. Now, let us say a taxable person did not carry out any transactions during a particular tax period. Now, for that tax period, is this taxable person required to furnish the returns? Yes. Whether or not, if this fellow is a registered person, whether or not he carries out any transactions during a particular tax period, he has to furnish the returns. So if no transactions are carried out during a particular tax period, he has to furnish the nil return. Now the taxpayer is opting for voluntary cancellation of GSTN. Actually, GSTR1 can be filed only from the first of the next month. But there are two exceptions for that. One is if the registration is cancelled, then what that fellow can do is until the date of cancellation, once he receives the acknowledgement for cancellation application, from that date he can furnish the GSTR1. So up to that period he has to furnish the GSTR1. Suppose where a taxable person is converted from a normal taxpayer to a composition taxpayer. So GSTR1 will be available for filing only for the period during which the taxpayer was registered as a normal taxpayer. So GSTR1 is to be filed by the normal taxpayer. A composition taxpayer need not furnish the GSTR1. So this GSTR1 will be allowed to be filed only up to the period up to which this taxable person is a regular dealer. Now, the taxpayer has to take some precautions in order to comply the GST law. This fellow should ensure that he uploads the outward supplies in GSTR1 on a regular basis or on a timely basis. On a regular basis or a timely basis. What is the due date for furnishing the GSTR1? It is the 10th of the next month. Now, suppose the volume of the business is huge. There are thousands of B2B invoices. Now, if simply there are a few tens of invoices, now this person, it will be easy for him to upload it. But there may be businesses who are involved in huge volumes of transactions, and that too B2B, because B2C can be given in a summary form. Of course, interstate supply B2C more than 2,50,000 invoice level reporting is required. But for all other B2C transactions, you can give in the summary form. Okay. Now, of course, in interstate supply for B2C less than 2.5 lakh, you have to give state-wise summary. But for intrastate, total summary is enough. Now, the point here is, if there are a huge volume of transactions, that to B2B, then it is advisable for them to upload the invoices on a daily basis or on a weekly basis. There is no bar in filling the GSTR1 during that month. Suppose we are filling the data for September 2020 tax period. Now from September 1 to September 30th, the uploading can be done, but filing can't be done, or submission can't be done. Submission can be done only from 10th to 1st to 10th, 11th to 15th not allowed, again from 16th it is allowed. So submission is not possible, but uploading of invoices can be done. So uploading on invoices on a daily or regular basis will act as a key of compliance. Okay, so make it a point that invoices are uploaded regularly, because if in last minute rush, what will happen is you may not be able to upload the invoices properly, because when the GST site is very much busy with a large number of taxpayers logging in and a large number of taxpayers uploading the information, sometimes what will happen is the site will crash. You may not be able to upload your invoices within time, thereby which leads to non-compliance of the law. So in order to ensure compliance of the law, make it a point that there you regularly upload your B2B invoices. And the second thing what you should keep in mind is, they should be in a constant follow-up in respect of inward supplies. Whenever the supplier uploads the invoices, this will be available in 2A of the recipient. 2A of the recipient. So if the inward supplies which are not appearing in 2A, they may follow up with the supplier and ensure that they upload the invoices in time to ensure that you are not deprived of the ITC. To ensure that you are not deprived of the ITC, because unless otherwise your uh, inward supplies are appearing in your 2A, you are not entitled to take your tax credit. Of course, there is a percentage or relaxation up to 10 percentage. Okay. Now, furnishing of returns under section 39. So, what is that? GSTR 3B. So, what the GST rule number 61 sub rule number 5 of GST rules states that, it states that, as well as section 39 subsection 1. Section 39 subsection 1 states that a monthly return in GSTR 3 for every registered person other than, means some people are not required to furnish GSTR 3. Who are they? Input service distributor, non-resident taxable person, composition taxable person, TDS fellow, and TCS fellow, and ODR fellow. Okay. Now these fellows, of course, ODR also outside India, no permanent establishment in India, and that too non-taxable recipient. So these fellows need not file the GSTR 3. The other people have to file. Now what is the due date for GSTR 3? It is to be filed for 20th day of the next month. But what happened is, though there is a provision in the Act as well as the rules with regard to GSTR 3, this has never been implemented. So instead of GSTR 3, what has happened is a simplified form called GSTR 3B has been notified. Now this GSTR 3B has to be furnished by 20th of the next month. Means September 2020-23B, the due date is 20th 9 2020. Okay. Now 3 is not still notified or enabled. Only GSTR 3B has to be furnished. Now, how GSTR 3B can be furnished? It has to be furnished electronically through Common Portal. This can be done directly by the taxpayer or through the facilitation center. Now, what does 3B contain? 3B is a simple summary outward inward reverse charge return. Also eligible ITC, also with regard to the payment of tax. Mind you friends, GSTR 1 is a return for outward supply. Outward supply. Now GSTR 3B is here invoice level reporting is required. Invoice level reporting is required. But as far as 3B is concerned, it is a summary return. It is a summary return. Now here what you will be disclosing: outward supplies, inward supplies, and as well as tax payment also will be done through 3B only. Okay. Now 3B invoice level details are not required. Now what are the contents of GSTR 3B? We will understand with the help of this flow chart. As always, return contains two sets of details. One is basic details, the second part is the other details. Now in the basic details, you have to give the GSTN number of the taxpayer, you have to give the legal name of the registered person, as well as the what is the tax period for which you are furnishing that GSTR 3B. Now what are the other details which are required to be given in GSTR 3B? Summarize details of outward supplies as well as inward supplies liable for reverse charge. Summarize details of interstate supplies made to unregistered persons, composition persons, and unique identification number persons. What is the eligible ITC? What is the value of exempt nil rated non-GST inward supplies? What is the amount of payment of tax? What is the TDS or TCS credits? Friends, yesterday also what we have done is we have downloaded a GSTR1 and checked the details. Now for this also what you can do is you can download a GSTR 3B format. GSTR 3B format. You can download that. GSTR 3B format. Let's go and check in this site. Where is the format? Where is the format? I am not getting the format type. Here also we are not getting the format type. So where can I get the format type? Let's go and check here. Okay friends, we'll do one thing. We'll go to Taxman. We'll go to Taxman and log in to Taxman. Go to GST. Their forms. In that, sorry, GST RET, GSTR, GSTR 3B. This is ITC 33A 3B. Yes, so this is the format. Okay, this is the format of GSTR 3B. So these are the basic details. These are the basic details. What are the basic details? What is the tax period for which it has been furnished? What is the GST number? What is the legal name of the registered persons? Here you have details of outward supplies, inward supplies liable for reverse charge. Now out of these supplies, what you have to do is details of interstate supplies made to unregistered persons, composition taxable persons, and unique identification number persons. So these are actually filled in 3.1a itself, but still you have to give the information. Next comes what is the eligible ITC? ITC available whether in full or part for import of goods, import of service, inward supplies liable to reverse charge, inward supplies from ISD, all other ITC. Now ITC that has been reversed as per 42 and 43 and others. Ineligible ITC as per section 15, that is blocked credit, others. Sorry. What are the values of exempt nil non-GST inward supplies? Okay. Now the details of payment of tax and the details of TDS or TCS credit. Now these information have to be filled as per GSTR 3A. Okay, GSTR 3B. GSTR 3B. So this information has to be filled. Okay, right. So whenever you are learning about a form, it is better go and open that form because these forms are maybe readily available in the Google itself. or you can go to the GST site. There also the forms are available. Next comes GSTR 4. Friends, for regular dealers, GSTR 1 and GSTR 3B is applicable. But for composition dealers, they have to make a quarterly payment of tax through CMP 08, and they have to, this CMP 08 is an 18th of month following the quarter. Following the quarter means for Q1 of 1920, you have to furnish it by July 18, and they should also file the annual return GSTR 4, and the due date is 30th April. So for financial year 1920, annual return has to be furnished by 30th April 2020. Let's go through that. So we have two composition schemes. One is for goods and another one is for services. We have two composition schemes. Now, person eligible to file return, periodicity and form of the return. So, who are required to file the annual return in form number 4? One is section 10 fellow, means goods. Now this notification is with regard to services, that 50 lakhs we have learned in the previous chapters. Now GSTR 4 is to be filed for the financial year or part of the financial year. Now it has to be filed through common portal. It can be filed either directly by the taxpayer, or he can go to the facilitation center and get it filed. So apart from this GSTR 4, what this fellow has to do, he has to file the GST CMP 08, because the tax is to be paid, quarterly. Tax is to be paid quarterly. Now this quarterly tax is to be paid through CMP 08. Okay. So by what time it has to be furnished? So it has to be furnished by 18th of the month succeeding the quarter for which the statement is being filed. Okay. So composition taxpayers return is to be filed yearly. Tax is to be paid. Tax is to be paid quarterly. Okay. Now, what is the due date for filing GSTR 4 and a statement of payment of self-assessed tax? So, GSTR 4 for financial year should be furnished by 30th April of the succeeding financial year. That has been represented through a pictorial representation. Now, this CMP 08 is to be paid. Amount is to be paid, and a statement, quarterly statement has to be made, is to be submitted by 18th of the March succeeding that quarter. Now what is this notification? This notification that 6% for services where the aggregate turnover does not exceed 50 lakhs. Okay. Now moving forward, what is the due date of filing GST CMP 08 for the quarter? It is the 18th of the month succeeding the quarter. This has been represented by a flowchart or a pictorial representation. This we have already learned. Auto population of inward supplies. Now the inward supplies for composition supplier or person paying under 219. This is for services 50 lakhs received from registered persons. Those supplier will file GSTR 1 and it gets auto populated in 4A of the recipient. It gets populated in the 4A of the recipient. Now let us understand what are the contents of GSTR 4. What are the contents of GSTR 4? GSTR4 contains basic details and other details. And similarly, as we have downloaded GSTR1 and GSTR3B, you may also make it convenient to download GSTR4 and once go through the GSTR4 so that you will be in a position to remember it. Or if you are an article student, if you just fill one or two times GSTR4, you will never forget in your lifetime what are the contents of the GSTR4. So article training is very important, because once when you do the work, let us say you are only mugging up, then what you have to do? What is GSTR4? Who has to file it? What is the time limit? You will be drawing charts, you will be writing, you will be doing what not of all sorts of things. But once when in your office, if you really fill up a GSTR4 and if you furnish a GSTR4 in your lifetime, you will never forget about the what are the contents, to whom it has to be filed, within what time it has to be filed. Everything you will be able to retain it for longer periods of time. Now, what are the basic details? GSTN, legal name, trade name, these are basic details. These are the basic details. Some other details which are to be given are TDS TCS credits received, tax, interest, late fees paid, refund claimed from electronic cash ledger. Next, details regarding inward and outward supplies. Invoice-wise details of all inward supplies are to be given. Summary of self-assessment liability as per GSTR 8 is to be given. Tax rate-wise details of outward supplies, inward supplies attracting reverse charge on a consolidated basis, it has to be given. You once go through that form, you will be able to understand in a better manner. Consolidated details of outward supplies. Here, invoice level reporting is not necessary in the case of a composition dealer, because the recipient will not be able to take the ITC. So the recipient is not entitled for ITC. Therefore, composition taxpayers and persons paying tax under this notification are required to provide only consolidated details and not invoice details. But if you are making interstate and intrastate inward supplies registered from received from registered and unregistered persons, are to be provided invoice wise. So inward supplies to be given invoice wise. But as far as outward supplies are concerned, what they have to do? They have to give on a consolidated basis. Now, coming to the tax liability. The composition suppliers and the persons paying tax under notification are not eligible to take ITC. They discharge their tax liability only by debiting the electronic cash ledger. A composition goods fellow or composition service fellow can't avail the input credit, but they have the output liability to be discharged. So the output liability to be discharged by the composition goods and composition service fellows only by way of payment through electronic cash ledgers. Okay, next. Statements or returns for the period prior to opting for composition scheme. Generally what will happen is, the compositions, suppose a taxpayer is a regular taxpayer. Now what this person want to do is, he want to shift to composition dealer. He want to shift to the composition scheme. Now from when can he shift to composition scheme? He can shift to composition scheme only from 1st of April. He can shift to composition scheme from the 1st of April. So from 1st of April he is into composition scheme. But what about the returns up to March 2020? Because he is shifting to composition scheme on 1st of April 2020. What about the returns up to March 2020? So what has been provided is, a registered person opting to composition scheme from the beginning of a financial year, he will, where required, furnish statements or returns relating to period prior to paying tax under composition scheme, means up to March 2020. These returns, what he has to do? He has to furnish it by due date for furnishing the return for the month of September of the succeeding financial year, or furnishing the annual return, whichever is earlier. So what is the due date for furnishing the next year September return? It will be 20th October 2020, or date of filing of annual return for the financial year 1920, whichever is earlier. Whichever is earlier. So by that time, the prior period's returns, when he was in the regular scheme, are to be furnished. From 1st April he came into composition scheme, thereby he will be required to file GSTR 4, and he has to furnish the statement of CMP 08. Now, the reverse also we should understand. Composition supplier and person paying tax under notification will not be eligible to avail ITC on receipt of invoice or debit notes from the suppliers for the period prior to their opting to pay tax under composition scheme. These people will not be eligible to avail ITC on receipt of invoices or debit notes from the suppliers for the period prior to their opting to pay tax. And let us say this fellow 1/4/2020, he is opting composition scheme. Now what is happening? This fellow is receiving invoices or debit notes from suppliers for the period prior to their opting to pay tax under composition scheme. So 31st March 2020. So for this period, he is now receiving invoices. Now receiving invoices or debit notes. Now can he avail ITC? No, because from 1/4/2020 you are not at all entitled to claim input tax credit. Because from 1/4/2020 you already came into the composition scheme. Okay. Now, GSTR 4 for period prior to exiting from the composition scheme. Now we'll go to the reverse of the previous illustration. Now previously what happened here? This fellow converted from regular to composition. Now here what is happening? Composition to regular. Now friends, you should understand one thing. Regular to composition can be done only from 1st of April. But from composition to regular, it can happen on any date. Because It is not, only when your turnover is up to 1.5 crores you are eligible for composition scheme. If it exceeds that limit, you should definitely come into regular scheme. It will not happen that only on 1st of April it is going to exceed. It is not like that. In the middle of the year you got a very good contract, thereby you are crossing the threshold, then you can't remain in the regular composition scheme. You have to shift to the regular scheme. Okay, so a registered person opting to withdraw from composition scheme on his own motion, or where option is withdrawn at the instance of the proper officer, and a registered person ceases to pay tax under this scheme where furnished GST CMP 8. So whenever he is in the composition scheme, he has to furnish CMP 08 statement as well as a GSTR 4 return, right? Now, so for the period during which he is the composition dealer, what he has to do is he has to file the CMP 8 by 18th of the month succeeding the quarter in which the date of withdrawal or cessation falls. Okay, so during the Q3, that is October to December quarter, this fellow is converting from composition dealer to regular dealer. So until he is the composition dealer, so for Q3 what he has to do is this, let's understand it to be 1920. So by 18th of January 2020, this fellow has to file the CMP 08, and by 30th of April 2020, this fellow has to file this GSTR 4. This fellow has to file the GSTR 4. Now the same points have been explained in the next page by way of a diagram. Now, as per section 29(2), proper officer is empowered to cancel the registration if a person paying tax on composition scheme has not furnished his GSTR 4 for 3 consecutive tax periods, means 3 years. GSTR 4 is an annual return. Any other taxable person has not furnished the return for 6 months. Okay, the registration can be cancelled. Now here we have this pictorial representation. This fellow is a regular taxpayer to composition, or a regular taxpayer to this 6% notification. Then what he has to do, statements relating to payer period, they have to furnish it till the due date for furnishing September of the succeeding financial year, or filing the annual return whichever is earlier. Now what is happening, composition person is coming to regular, or this 6% fellow is coming to regular. Then what he has to do, this CMP 08 for the period prior to the exit from composition scheme, 18th of the month succeeding the quarter, and for GSTR 4, 30th April of the end of the financial year during which such withdrawal falls. Okay, GSTR 3B and 4 is to be filed even though there is no business activity. Nil return is to be filed. This we discussed. Okay. Now, coming to GSTR 5, return for non-resident taxable person. This is section 39(5), read with rule number 63. Okay, so what is the return form? GSTR 5. So non-resident taxable persons are those suppliers who will not have a business establishment in India. They come to India for short period and make the supply. Normally what they will do is they will import their products into India and they will supply here in India. Now, what is this concept of non-resident taxable person? We discussed in chapter 7 registration. A non-resident taxable person is not required to furnish GSTR 1. Is not required to furnish GSTR 1. What he can do? He can simply file a form called GSTR 5 for every month. Okay. So the details of outward supplies and inward supplies will be incorporated in GSTR 5. What is the last date for filing the GSTR 5? Within 20 days from the end of the calendar month or 7 days after the last day of validity period of registration, whichever is earlier. Because for non-resident taxable person and casual taxable person, the registration will be given for a specified period. There is also a time limit, maximum time limit, and that can also be extended, that we learned in the registration chapter. Okay, so this GSTR 5 fellow has to furnish the return monthly by within 20 days from the end of the month, or the validity of registration has expired, then within 7 days after the last day of the validity period. Now, this non-resident taxable person has to pay tax, interest, penalty, fees, or any amount which is payable under this Act till the last day of the filing GSTR 5. Also, a non-resident taxable person is not required to furnish annual return also. Now, what is the due date for payment of tax? Be it 3B or GSTR 5. For both of them, the due date for filing the return itself is the due date for payment of tax also. So, pay the tax and file the return. What will happen if the return is not is filed beyond the due date? Then you have to pay late fees and also you have to pay the interest also. Now, registered person paying tax under composition scheme of notification 2/2019, the due date for payment of tax is delinked with GSTR 4, because GSTR 4 is to be filed 30th of April next year, but CMP 08, so these two fellows, composition goods, composition services, what they can do, they can the return filing date and tax payment date both are different, but for 3B and GSTR 5, the tax filing return filing date and tax payment date are same due dates. Okay, we already know that non-resident taxable persons or casual taxable persons should make advance deposit. Okay, now rectification of errors or omissions. Now, section 39 subsection 9, return has been filed, how can it be revised if some changes are to be made? Now, returns are built from details of individual transactions under GST. So there is no requirement of revised return. If any requirement of revision arises due to change a set of invoices or debit notes or credit notes, any need to revise return may arise due to the need to change a set of invoices or debit notes or credit notes. So what the GST law provides is, instead of revising the return, the system allows changing the details of those transactions that are required to be amended. So they can be amended in any of the future GSTR 1. So you have the amendment tables. In that amendment tables, you can change. Also, omission or correction of particulars discovered in the return filed under 39, that is GSTR 3B, can be rectified in the return to be filed for the tax period during which such omission or incorrect particulars are noticed. This we already understood with the help of an example also. But there is an exception to rectification. 39(9) will not permit rectification of error on account of scrutiny, audit, inspection, enforcement activities by tax authorities. So these things you have to do it by DRC 03 only. Okay. So rectification of returns is not permitted on account of scrutiny, audit, inspection or enforcement authorities. Now, so what it implies is, if any tax is liable to be paid because of scrutiny, audit, inspection or enforcement activities by tax authorities, the ITC can never be passed on. The ITC can never be passed on to the recipient. Now, is there any restriction for or time limit for making rectification? Yes, there is a time limit. That is, suppose this we have already understood with examples. Suppose a mistake has been committed in September 19 return. So this is financial year 2019-20. So this rectification can be done September 20 return due date, that is 20th October 2020, or date of filing annual return, whichever is earlier. Okay. Rectification on account of scrutiny audit can't be done. Revision of return is not permitted. Rectification is permitted, but the due date is, we already discussed here with the help of an example. With the help of an example, here we have discussed. Okay. Now, a return furnished under 39(1) on which self-assessed tax has been paid in full, then only it will be considered as a valid return. You can file the current month return only when the previous month return is filed. If you want to file October 2020 return, ensure that September 2020 is filed. Only when September 2020 return is filed, October 2020 return will be allowed to be filed. The furnishing of return, it should be electronically signed. If it is not electronically signed, it will be considered as not filed. In how many ways electronically filing can be done, signing can be done? DSC. DSC is mandatory for companies and LLPs. You can go for e-sign, Aadhaar based. You can go for EVC. So all can do DSC. Is it mandatory? It is mandatory only in respect of two fellows, two registered persons. Who are they? LLPs and companies. As far as other SSCs are concerned, either they can go for Aadhaar OTP or they can go for electronic verification code, which will be sent to the registered mobile number of the authorized signatory. Okay. It will also be sent to the registered email address also. So friends, we will continue in our next session.